He was in the Unified Command. And we brought this team together, frankly, because OceanGate was operating without a plan. And we brought a team together to come up with a plan to effect a search.
Captain, I just want to clarify a point on that. When you say they were operating without a plan, do you mean a backup emergency rescue plan?
Yeah, exactly.
New details Friday even surprised the man in charge of the search. How crew members from Titan's support vessel, the Polar Prince, told the FBI they felt the ship shudder when communications with Titan were lost, a possible sign of implosion search officials didn't know about in June last year.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. The biggest clue to OceanGate's arrogance and hubris is arguably the fact that they had no rescue plan. Can you believe it? According to Coast Guard Search and Recovery Captain Jamie Frederick, he said, quote, "If OceanGate had a rescue plan, it was never presented to us." Can you believe it? OceanGate and Stockton Rush were so caught up in their own hubris, they didn't even have a plan to deal with a disaster. Another question that has been clarified is how come the families weren't alerted to what had happened when many of us seem to have greater insight, and that is thanks to James Cameron sharing what he knew. Do you remember on Monday, June 19, the Navy informed the Coast Guard that it had detected an anomaly that could have been an implosion around the time the Titan went missing. But because the information was both inconclusive and classified, and because aircraft were picking up knocking noises, Frederick did not inform families or the public, and that is according to an article in Wired.com. Now, I think what that shows is how this channel called it right, even with incomplete information, even when the US Coast Guard did not. We never took the knocking noises as better evidence than the anomaly. Why? Because an implosion made complete sense based on all the other information we knew leading up to it. But there's also something pretty incredible that was revealed on the final days of the hearing. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, if you found the analysis of the Titan submersible interesting and worthwhile, you might want to look at the same kind of analysis on the Bayesian super yacht. That is an ongoing investigation, and that craft still has to be salvaged, still has to be brought to the surface, still has to be recovered. And so you might find that also quite interesting. Was it the weather or human error? If you're finding this analysis, essentially the last chapter on the Titan submersible, this is essentially the epilogue. If you found this channel's analysis worthwhile, interesting, valuable, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So if we go back to that article in Wired, listen to this. Quote, "The Coast Guard panel then read a statement from the captain of the Polar Prince, Titan's surface support vessel. It reported that, in hindsight, he had felt the ship shudder at around the time communications with Titan were lost, but thought nothing of it at the time." Now, it's incredible when you have so much information and things are so obvious that some people can just ignore the obvious signs that are around them. I mean, it turns out the anomaly that the Navy heard, I think from hundreds of miles away, that could also be felt by the ship's captain less than a mile away, basically. And curiously, no one else seemed to feel it, certainly not from OceanGate's side anyway. Did you notice a weird Bermuda Triangle surrounding certain aspects of this case? For example, it was as if nobody in 2 weeks' worth of testimony could say the words, "the carbon fiber failed." It seems like no one could say those words or did say those words. Did anyone say those words? Also, for a company that was constantly singing its own praises, virtually no one from the company who was employed at the time of the implosion raised their hands, turned up, and stood up for themselves, or stood up for Stockton, or stood up for the submersible. Happy to do so to lure 3 luckless victims paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to a watery grave. But in the setting of a formal hearing, what's happened? Cat got your tongue?
What's the matter, cat? Got your tongue?
Now, going back to the article in Wired, quote, there was no public testimony from any of OceanGate's senior team, including Expedition Director Kyle Bingham, Operations Director Scott Griffiths, or Rush's wife Wendy, who was in charge of communications with the sub, nor from any crew of the Polar Prince. What little we know about the Titan's final mission comes from testimony from former directors who left before the Titan implosion, and as also junior OceanGate employees and contractors who could not testify to many events and decisions. Wired also highlights another hinky omission. Quote, another surprising omission was during Thursday's testimony of Mark Negley, a Boeing engineer. Negley had carried out a preliminary design study for the Titan and assisted OceanGate with testing equipment and advice for nearly a decade. Well, that is certainly going back quite a long way, isn't it? He testified to the challenges of building carbon fiber structures. Now, do you remember what I said earlier? Something that seemed to be missing from this hearing was any individual uttering the words, the carbon fiber failed. And so what about this individual? And also, what about the panel? Did the panel ask anyone, do you think it was the carbon fiber? What's your opinion about the carbon fiber? And so, according to Wired, the panel did not ask Negley about an email he sent Rush in 2018, sharing an analysis based on information Rush had provided. And this is a quote from that email. We think you are at a high risk of a significant failure at or before you reach 4,000 meters. And that email included a chart showing a skull and crossbones at around that depth. Now, once again, it's a significant failure of what? Do you think it's the titanium that was going to fail? I suppose it could be the acrylic window. That's certainly possible. But what is even more possible? What is even more likely? What was already crackling? What was already snap, crackling, and popping? Now, while it may seem as though there's not any real closure or even transparency, there has been to some extent. Why? Because OceanGate no longer exists. The fact that they shut themselves down, including their social media, including aspects of their digital footprint, well, all of that is now beyond censure. That is arguably a confession of a sort. Make no mistake, what we see here in terms of OceanGate's collective silence is a similar craven silence we saw with the laundries in the Petito case. It suggests to me a group of people who are only too happy to drink tubs of Kool-Aid, make loud noises in their brittle echo chambers in order to cavalierly sell seats, really expensive seats, and a shaky safety narrative, also a dubious safety narrative, in order to line their pockets. But when the fantasy runs aground, well, then the silence is deafening. This shouldn't be so surprising, though. If one can't be accountable for the possibility of something going wrong, they didn't even have a rescue plan. Well, when something does go wrong and does so spectacularly, what do you think you can really expect besides shallow, self-serving self-preservation? What OceanGate has revealed isn't the size of men and women's hearts. It hasn't shown us heroes, but the opposite. Just how small and pathetic some people can become in the face of overwhelming reality. This hearing, as far as I'm concerned, also shows even when people come together to expressly answer who and why and what happened, it's a slippery process. Apparently, human beings just aren't very good at dealing with reality. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.